I always record the sessions. That way you guys have a, if you need to refresh your memory, normally what I'll do is I'll do a quick edit. I don't take a whole lot out, just the BS part, and then put like an introduction on it and then put it on the YouTube channels. Now, when you get to the YouTube channel, there's a whole plethora of Block 7 information from previous classes. So if you are having some difficulties just listening to what's going on with this particular class, I suggest that you go to another class. My recommendation, I think, is 222 is a class where they actually had a lot of questions, and I was able to interject, and hopefully it would explain it for you guys if you are ever afraid to ask a question. So here we go. We're going to be looking at Objective 1 Alpha. Identify basic facts about timing and synchronization standards. My name is Mr. Mayer. Just remember you have 70% to make on this test. That's 28 out of 40. Anything less than 28 correct, you will be below the minimum score of 70%. And I'd emphasize that this is a very tough block. Along the rankings that everybody gives it, I think this is the toughest block. Block 3, it comes in a close second, and then it goes from there. And I noticed that some of you have some difficulties in the last class. So if you want me to give you like SIA, I do not have a problem with it. I'm on Discord a lot. Now, if you hadn't noticed from my introduction, I do play some games, like World of Tanks. That's my favorite game. And I play with platoon mates, and we have fun. We don't go raging like some of the other players like to do, but it just gives you an idea. And we use Discord in a different server. So just to give you an idea, if you ask me a question, it may be 10 to 20 minutes later before I notice it, because if I'm in a game, I'm not going to notice it. So there you have it. Let's go on to our next objective with our portion here, which is the FSC application. Before I do this, you can read through this, and I'll ask if I got your names properly pronounced. So it's Chung, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Hamilton?
Yes, sir.
Hancock?
Yes, sir.
Ladono?
Yes, sir.
Is that close, or how you?
That's good. That's good.
Okay. Bridges?
Yes, sir.
Hubbard?
Yes, sir.
Malin?
Yes, sir.
Ooh. Maddie?
Matei, sir.
Did I have you? Did I have you in another block, or?
No, sir. This is the first time.
Okay. I could have swore I'd seen that name somewhere else.
I
Forgive me.
believe you've popped into a few of our sessions before, sir.
Oh,
Yeah, I believe I saw your name before as well.
maybe block 2 or block 4.
Maybe.
I don't remember. I just remember your profile picture.
Oh, okay. Yeah, my nickname on World of Tanks is Obi-John Kenobi. Oh,
Ha,
I know. Hey, what can I say? I vowed
I
that.
love it, sir.
Go ahead, sir.
Star Wars reference. I love it, sir.
Yeah, well, been a Star Wars fan for a very long time. So we have Airman Tran.
Yes, sir.
Did I say that right?
Yes.
And Zellers.
Yes, sir.
All right. Good to go on that last name?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So as you can read from the FSC application, you guys are going to be dealing with a lot of timing. You guys have already touched upon it. You probably didn't realize it. If anybody has ever heard the words phase lock loop before, And that's how you get your frequencies for your radios, is using phase lock loop. And we work off a lot of the timing sequence when you guys are playing your games online, not probably in the dorms, but you get the idea. When you're playing games online, nothing is worse than that ping rate going through the roof just in time for you to die. We're going to look at the purpose of timing, timing standards, timing sources, timing coordination, distribution agencies, timing jitter, network synchronizations. Let me ask you, is there anybody in here that does not play a game? And I'm talking, like Halo, things like that. Chung, do you play a game or games?
I used to, sir.
What did you play?
I play a lot of Halo. I play like PUBG Mobile right now just because it's on my phone and I don't have any gaming systems here. But
Okay.
About it.
Okay. Hamilton, you play?
Yes, sir.
What do you play?
I'll play Destiny as well as Titanfall's one of my favorites, and I play PUBG quite a bit too.
Titanfall 1 or 2?
2.
Okay. I tried. For some reason, consoles don't work well with me. Hancock, you play?
Yes, sir. I play Animal Crossing and Pokemon.
That works. My kids play that, and they're in their late 20s and early 30s. Lindono?
Sir, I play RTS like Total War.
Okay.
He's outside.
Oh, why is he outside?
Hello?
I'm just kidding, sir. It sounds like wind, though.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, much better now. They're accusing you of being outside there. Okay, Bridges? Go ahead, Lindo.
Yeah, sorry, just my connection's bad, and there's a fan in front of my computer. Sorry about that.
Oh, okay. Yeah. OBS corrects for that, Bridges?
I play a lot of Apex Legends.
Okay. Hubbard?
There's a long list.
Well, first person shooter, what?
Sure, I was playing some Halo yesterday.
Okay. Malin?
Oh, yes, sir. I play a lot of Overwatch.
Okay. I could never make it out of the training session because me and consoles, for some reason, that joystick doesn't like to work with me. Matei?
Yes, sir. I play a bunch of different games. RPGs, first-person shooters. I'm on Apex Legends usually,
Okay.
but the Wi-Fi here sucks. So
Agreed.
yeah.
Richard?
I play a bunch of games, sir. Say CSGO for this one.
Tran?
I play League of Legends and Fallout New Vegas.
Okay. Great. And Zellers?
A wee bit of groups. I play Yakuza and Devil May Cry.
Okay. Well, the reason why I'm trying to get you guys, when you're playing these games, especially, well, I shouldn't say especially, when you are online playing against other people, there is nothing worse than that ping rate. It has everything to do with what we're going to go over for the next couple days. That ping rate, and this is just me, there's nothing worse than when you're driving your tank, there's a river coming up, and you make that right-hand turn, and next thing you know, your ping rate hits 999 very briefly, and then the next thing you know, you're looking up, and you're underwater. So it's just one of those things. Yes, it is, especially when you're trying to ace that tank. So anyway, everything in here has everything to do with what you guys are experiencing in the dorms. And if you had the chance to play an online game in the dorm, I'm sure that ping rate is ridiculous. So we're going to look at the purpose of timing. One of these things is you're going to be dealing with timing a lot. It has everything to do with the signaling formats, the computers you're using, the phase lock loop that's in all of this equipment. Okay, I'll wait on you. But just to show you, this is what we're looking at. So when Chung gets back, I'm going to go ahead and go through the explanation before I hit the next slide. But this is a scenario where you see a multiplexer in here. We used to teach this multiplexer called an FCC 100. This FCC 100 was 16 channels. Now, there is this little thing between when I use the word channels and users. Okay? You can have one channel and one user. So that would make sense. But as you can see here, when we look at the Nipper net and the local switchboard and the Zipper net, we're looking at multiple users. Good job. We're looking at multiple users on one channel. But if you take a look at the computers down on the bottom right, you'll see it's one channel, one user. There's reasons for that. Obviously, on a Nipper or Zipper net, you're not going to have everybody going out and trying to reach to the distant ends, just like the trunking system that you guys had seen in Block 5 that they should have gone over. So it gives you an idea what a multiplexer can do. You do have encryption on especially the Zipper net, and if you want to encrypt it before you send it out, you can. So in this case, we have what's called a double encryption, which is even better. Triple is even better, quadruple, but you know, it depends on the devices and how well they are able to do that. We look at 4 different types of timing. We got apparent solar time, mean solar time, atomic time, coordinated universal time, and if you are in the 80s, hammer time. You know, dun da da dum. No, I know. So we look at the first one called apparent solar time. This one has everything to do with the sun. The sundial is the only way I can explain what they were doing. It is the least accurate time. When we compare apparent to mean solar time, as technology grew, you're going to start seeing where they started using pocket watches, and in some places they had a mechanical clock in the town square. That's how they kept time. So when you go from one point to the other point, they started figuring out, hey, it's not the same time from when I left, especially if I'm quicker than the sun going around to another place. This also happened when you take a look at the sailors. And the biggest ones were the English, the Dutch, the Portuguese, the Spanish, the French, you know, mainly European individuals started figuring out where they were on the globe by using I think it's called a sextant, and being able to judge what time they were in that part of the world. And then when everything came to fruition, they figured out, well, gee, you know, hey, we've got so many seconds and so forth and so on. So they started building mechanical watches, or pocket watches and clocks. Well, you notice that clocks began each day at Greenwich, England. Now, if you take a look at, I think it's the latitude, which goes up and down on the world, we got a bunch of them out there. This is where the prime meridian is, not to be confused with, what is it, The Sorcerer's Apprentice, if you watch that movie. So you got Greenwich, England, zero meridian, that line up and down, that's where the beginning of time is considered. At that point, they called it GMT for Greenwich Mean Time. It's also called Universal Time. So when we started improving upon technology, we started looking at atomic time. Now, with atomic time, this is what we're using to produce, hey, this is the time now. They have many of these, and they average them out using phase lock loop in order to develop the time. Now, with this in mind, we started developing better timing circuits to keep things on time. GMT is still the world standard. This particular international atomic time is part of it, using the atomic oscillators. Then we get to when they started consolidating everything into the world time. So the timing standards versus, the sources being the oscillators. The standard now is UTC. Now, if you take a look at the acronym UTC and you go Coordinated Universal Time, it doesn't fit, does it? It's CUT if you want to go that way, but why do we have UTC? Well, it is a French word for universal time coordinated. That's where the keepers of the time are nowadays. GMT, we still reference that prime meridian as GMT. They're still interchangeable, but we always call it UTC, Universal Time Coordinated. You'll notice that countries can keep these clocks plus or minus a millisecond. If you were to, and we'll get into timing standards here, if you were to look at the time that it takes to get from UTC to here, there is a delay of X amount of milliseconds, and it varies if you go to this one website. So the big thing is now we got everything lined up, and back in 1972 to this universal time, we're going to start using oscillators to keep things on. So with this in mind, what they developed was these time zones. You're going to get to experience that if you ever have to go overseas. Anybody going overseas? Anybody got their orders?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Where you going? Okay. I think Bridges was one. Where are you going?
Daegu, Korea, sir.
Okay. Who else is going overseas?
Me, sir.
Yes, sir.
Osan.
Where'd you go, Zellers?
Osan, Korea.
Osan. And Tran, you said?
Yes, sir. I'm going to Suwon, Korea.
Okay. Wow. All of a sudden the Koreans are popping up on, I guess they've got a turnover there. Anybody else?
I'm on Ramstein.
Okay. Lucky you.
Yay.
Anybody else?
Korea, sir.
Everybody's going to Korea, it seems like. Very few is going to the European theater. Okay. They must have a big changeover. People, it's their time to come back, so they may be replenishing with you guys. So with that in mind, you're going to cover a bunch of time zones to getting there. It's probably going to take you a couple days to get there to Korea. And we're going to show you here the dateandtime.com. That is a really awesome website. If you get a chance, go online, type it in. As you can see, there's 24 official time zones. That's what they figured out to get 24 hours in there. You'll notice that UTC is always starting at the 0 or prime meridian. At Keesler Air Force Base, we're going to have two clocks. We're going to have a local clock, and we're going to have what's called a Zulu clock. The military always uses Zulu as a reference for UTC. And the idea behind it is to keep the missions on track. It doesn't make any sense to have everybody's local time filled into it versus if we just have one time, which is the Zulu or UTC or 0 meridian, whatever you want to call it, GMT. So it just gives you an idea. We're going to use it. We're going to call it Zulu for the military. Say it is actually UTC where we're getting it from. So let's take a look at this map. Now this map is pretty doggone awesome. I'm not sure if you can see it if you have a phone, but it just goes to show you how many different time zones that just the USA is in. You've got Eastern, you got Central, you got Mountain, you got Pacific, you got Alaskan. I think we have Hawaiian, are considered our time zones. But there are some other places in there. If you take a look at India, I want to say Iraq, it looks like. Australia's another one. They have diagonal lines in there. those diagonal lines are showing you that this particular area is in the half hours. So countries adopt whatever they can use, but they still go by the universal time for their time. Now I'm going to point out China, for example. Look how many different time zones it covers, but you notice it only has one. So that particular country has one time zone and pretty much is saying, hey, this is a time zone that where everybody is on time, and that's the way they keep it. So it just depends on the country. Some cover 2 to 3, for example. Even in the United States, there are some states that don't observe Eastern Daylight Savings Time. There are certain cities that don't observe it either. So it just gives you an idea of what to expect out there as far as time zones. Now, if you take a look right around the edge of Alaska, that's far left, and if you take a look at the right, that's that international date line, and it goes ahead one day. So when you guys are flying into Korea, you're going to actually be ahead one day. Almost, let's see here, from where we are in Central Daylight Savings Time, or just Central Time, at 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 1, 2? Maybe 3, so wow, that's a bunch of hours. I think it's 11 hours, right? 12 hours. So you can see how many different time zones you're going to travel through. Let's take a look at the next one. We got timing sources. So the object behind this particular slide is, if I tell you at 9:24 right now, we're going to take a 5-minute break, be back at 9:29. What I just did is I made my computer time sequence here as the primary source. You look at your watch and say, well, he said 9:24, mine says 9:26. Well, yours is a secondary. You have to either add to or subtract. Well, in this case, you know that there's subtract to, so you know that at 9:32 you need to be back. Disregard 9:31. I can't add today for some reason. So your watch is a secondary source, mine is a primary source. So the idea here is you always want to try to calibrate your primary source with the most accurate. Computers are more accurate than your digital watch, so to speak. Why? Because the digital watch is a standalone. The computer uses a lot of references in order to keep time, mainly the GPS as well as NIST, and we'll get into that in just a little bit. There are 2 different types of oscillators that we are using out there right now that we're going to recognize. Not saying that there's any more, just saying, hey, this is what we're using out there that we want to utilize. So we have quartz and atomic. Now with quartz, it uses something called the piezoelectric effect. Did anybody, or does anybody remember from back in Dolan Hall what the piezoelectric effect is doing for us?
Yes. When you apply electricity to a certain material, it'll distort.
Yeah, it'll start creating oscillations, and we can control it at that point. We have a reference frequency that it develops. We do have 2 things that are problematic for it. Things like temperature and aging. Temperature we can control, but aging, And I still remember back in the day when digital watches came out, and they were good for about 1.5, 2 years before you had to put a battery in it. And then after you put a battery in it, it was still good for another year or 2. But it does age. After about the 4th or 5th year, you can throw that watch away. Next up, we have atomic oscillators. These are definitely more accurate than the quartz. I have played with the rubidium, not as in I got in and played with the atomic particles. No, I've used the rubidium clock. It was in the old 206 pallets that were in the Humvees. You have a newer one which is called cesium. Now, when you look at the GPS system as a whole, because this is where they use it, the cesium is more newer equipment. The rubidium are the older equipment. They have just started replacing most of the atomic oscillators with newer oscillators that are more accurate with these. But these are still in some equipment that we have out there, and that's the reason why we cover these. With rubidium, all we're interested in is look how accurate it is when you compare it to quartz, but when you go to cesium, it's more accurate than the rubidium. Now we have these distribution agencies. So we looked at timing sources, we've looked at timing standards. Standards being, hey, this is the time for now. The source being, hey, this is being developed to reference my time for the timing standard. So time coordination, you got to have an agency that's going to distribute time. And everybody's got to be on the same page. We know that it's 86,400 seconds for each day. There are some problems that it might have to compensate for. For example, I think it was Saturday we had the summer solstice. So what does that mean? Well, that's when we are supposed to get the max amount of sun, and now it's getting ready to go back to winter, at least for our area in the world. So the idea is you still have the tilt of the axis, the seasons, you still have the wobble effect of our Earth, you still have an elliptical orbit of our Earth. So it just goes to show you how much is being thought out as to how much time is in a day. The first agencies, or the agencies that we look at, is called BIPM, USNO, and NIST. The first one we have is BIPM. Now, this is the keeper of time. This is where they have all these super-duper atomic oscillators. And you'll notice it says BIPM. And we say, well, International Bureau of Weights and Measures. Well, there you go again. It is a French word. I think it's Bureau International Precision and Measurements. Now, why in the world would we have an agency like that? Well, not only do they keep time, but they are the place everybody goes and gets their instruments calibrated. When I say instruments, we're talking about what's a centimeter, what's a millimeter, what is a gallon, what's a kilometer, what's a mile, what's a foot, you know, things like that. And they are the keeper of those standards. So if you want to get your item calibrated, that's the place to go. So that's the reason why not only do they keep the time and everything else, but they also calibrate mainly scientific equipment. This is what the website looks like, and if you look at the top left-hand side, it says Bureau International Day. I'm not very good at saying French, but this is all in the English version, as you well know that you can get it converted when you go to those websites. They have a ton. You can see acoustics and ultrasound and vibration, chemistry and biology, electricity and magnetism, ionization and radiation, length, mass-related quantities, photo and radiometry, it looks like. So you can see right down here it says time and frequency. So if you were to click on this, now remember this is just a screenshot. Going out on the internet, you can look that up and see what the actual time is. We have our agency, which is a DoD. This one is where we use the time for our GPS satellites and a lot of other different things. But this is where Zulu is being pulled from because they pull it from UTC. Again, you'll notice that I've got a link to it, but there is a phone number. You can actually use this phone number to find out what time it is. It's going to provide you Eastern time, whether it's daylight savings or not, or it's going to, or it's going to provide you, there I go again, and it will provide you UTC time. So Eastern time, UTC time, approximately every 10 seconds it's doing it. Next up, we have the website that it goes to. You can see that I took this one on the 5th of June 2020 at the 2139. So in other words, 9 o'clock UTC. And you can go through the whole list of finding out anything else. Now, even though this is based out of Maryland, the actual place where they keep the time is right down the road a piece in Pensacola. It's also the place of the Blue Angels. So if you ever get a chance when they finally release you, highly recommend going down there, seeing if you can get a tour. Next up, we have NIST. This is the civilian side. You can see it provides time of day for on these particular call signs of WWVH and WWVB. WWV is the actual call sign of the main headquarters. That is in Maryland, right around DC. Now, VH and VB, VH being Hawaii, VB is Boulder, Colorado. Why is that important to us from the military standpoint? Well, if you're out there in the field and you have an HF radio that has, in our case, the Prick 150s, or anything that can get down in the HF area, you can get it on 2.5, 5, 10, 15, and 20 megahertz, any one of those frequencies, and listen to UTC time. The phone number is there if you wanted to listen to it. It will only provide you UTC time. It will not provide you Eastern time or Central time or Mountain time where the actual place is. They also provide another frequency, better known at 60 kHz. And that's more of a longer wavelength, and I don't think we got anything that gets down to that low. But it just goes to show you that this is how they provide time for everybody. They pull it off the HF dial and use that time, or they'll link it up using that phone number. I will tell you that it's easier to get UTC time through NIST than it is USNO. USNO, for some reason, it takes a couple times for you to get through in order to receive the time. This is what the NIST website, you can see. I highly recommend going through it and listening, or not listening, but they do have a couple videos out there about time, and it does have the history. Now, how in the world can you tell Hawaii's time when it's broadcasting versus Boulder, Colorado time? And I've heard it. It is an unusual circumstance. It's not rare. It's just time of day. You guys were back in the HF Wonderful World back in Block 2 and 4. Well, with that in mind, the Hawaii is a female voice. Boulder, Colorado is a male voice. And when I've heard it a couple times, is what was really weird. It was during in the middle of the day, which didn't make any sense to me because of the ionosphere. But we heard the Hawaii voice first, the female voice, and then right afterwards, we heard the male voice, which is Boulder, Colorado. It was weird. Very weird. So now we go into and change gears, something called timing jitter. Now this is where you have seen this before, you didn't realize what it was. So hopefully I can explain it to you. When we take a look at timing jitters, it is we have two different types. We got short term and long term. These are delays. Now, when you think about it, how long does it take for UTC signal going all the way through the underground cables, or I should say undersea cables, to get to me and display my time? Well, it takes milliseconds. At any point, there's something that goes wrong with that line, let's just say there's somebody accidentally cuts it, or they didn't cut it, they made the connector loose or whatever, well, that's going to delay our time. In other words, an undesirable shift in that time. And it's going to take some time to get it synced back up. You know, bye, in sync. Got to get it in sync? No. Okay.
I'm loving these references.
I know, it's just a bad. It's a punny day, get it?
Yes, sir.
Well, at least you guys are, inputting, and it makes me wonder about the rest of you guys. If you're going, oh gosh, I got a bad comedian here. I try. Anyway,
I'm smiling to myself, at least.
Just wait till I get the music on when I finally figure that one out. So with timing jitter, some of you, I shouldn't say some of you, who doesn't watch a YouTube video? That would be the correct question to ask. Is there anybody out there that does not watch a YouTube video? Okay. Or even Netflix or Hulu. Well, with Netflix and Hulu, I'm not so sure about, but I do know Netflix does it. Same with YouTube. If there is a delay, in other words, this undesirable shift, what you see is that little circle. Don't you? That little circle waits until it buffers to where it gets enough information so it can play the video where you don't have any hiccups in line. Now, obviously, if I'm at work and it's like 2 or 3 o'clock in the day and I'm trying to watch a video, forget it. There is so much delay in there, it's not even funny. In fact, I'll pause the video, go to the bathroom, come back, and it might be ready to play because the buffer takes a long time. Well, in that case, we have a short-term jitter and long-term jitter that can be caused, but the short-term is normally what you see at the front end where the circle hits for, let's just say, about 4 or 5 seconds, and all of a sudden everything starts playing. That is your short term. But what's nice about the short term is it uses something called elastic store. That's the buffering that you see. So the idea behind all this elastic store is so I can smoothly play either the video or the music or whatever it is that you want to listen to. So that is the object behind streaming. The idea is we don't want either jitter to happen. We want a real-time solution for this. Even though we could put it in a elastic store later on, you're probably going to look at my mouth and go, well, his mouth is moving, but I don't hear anything. Well, that's probably because the elastic store is not in sync. Bye. So we now have long-term jitter. So short-term elastic store, that's how it corrects it. Long-term, there's no way to correct that. We can live with it by using something called phase lock loop. Now, phase lock loop keeps everything in sync by taking the clock cycle that's coming into whatever it is, the server, whatever your computer net, and compares the two and gets everything back into sync. This is how everything works. You're going to see this in the TISR tech order and how a phase lock loop could work. Now, I don't go into great detail. We used to teach it down into great detail, but not anymore. But the TISR is an excellent area in how we can show what phase lock loop is really doing. Whole idea is I need to get everything back in sync, and phase lock loop does it. We have 4 different types of network synchronization. We have plesiochronous, mutual, master clock, and master slave. Is there any questions at this point before I go on?
No, sir.
Pretty self-explanatory, sir.
You guys getting thunder over there?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. When it gets to be that nasty and I don't get any feedback, I know what happened to y'all's Discord. I know it was a couple weeks back. We had that really nasty. Well, it really wasn't a nasty one, but it's a tropical storm, and it kind of knocked y'all's server out, so to speak, and you didn't get it back until like Wednesday.
Worst 2 days of my life.
Yeah. All right. So we have 4 different types of network synchronization. You have plesiochronous, better known as what I call the dinosaur. You got mutual, master clock, and master slave. Let's take a look at each one of them. Now, plesiochronous, this is probably the easiest way of when you want to link one computer to another. The big thing is neither one of those computers have a synchronized clock, so you're going to have to average everything. You're going to have to use Elastic Store. Now, with this one, the mutual one, the easiest way to do it is what I call a LAN party that you guys might have when you're playing each other and you're going computer to computer. This one is looking at everything, and they're averaging it out. If one of those fails, in other words, okay, I'm done for the night, and you got 10 people. Well, once you pull that plug and they take off, well, everything gets back to normal. Takes probably a second or two once they pull the plug. And then we have something called master's clock. My wife always yells at me because she can hear me going, okay, here it comes. The big story about Big Ben. Yeah, I'm going to do it. If you guys ever watch History Channel, they did a series on Big Ben. And master clock is what Big Ben is, but no longer. Back in the earlier day when they built Big Ben, they built it to where the chimes, you could hear the chimes for miles. And that's how everything was on time. But the problem is if Big Ben failed, everything fails. So no one knows, oh geez, what time it is. And if anybody gets orders to England right now, they probably won't have Big Ben up and running. I think it's going to take like another year or two. They are overhauling it and getting, as you well know, mechanical devices over a period of time, they get loose, they wear out, and so forth and so on. So that's what they're doing, is they're overhauling Big Ben in London. So with anything like this, if the master clock fails, everything fails. And the best story I got for that one is when I was in high school, our master clock failed. But au contraire, the principal had his time, and every time we were to change class, he'd get over the internet. It's okay, you got 5 minutes to change class, go change class. We were a small school anyway. Maybe 350, if that. The next one up is called a master slave. Now this one works off of what I call the pyramid method. You got one at the top, you got a couple at underneath of it, and so forth and so on. If the master clock fails, they always have something to take its place. This is the way the military works, because they always want to have redundancy when it comes to their timing sources, because everything works off the time. All of our computers, all of our satellite gear, all of our missions, everything works off of time. So get used to it. So with this master slave, and this is an old term from the 50s when they used hard drives, because they would have one where the master was, where all the operating system was, and the slave would be all the file sections. So with this is they developed a way to where using this, where our Department of Defense uses. For example, our primary, if the president is caught out in the open, they send him to Offutt Air Force Base. If Offutt Air Force Base gets blown up, they send him to Barksdale, and so forth and so on. I think all of our timing is pulled out of Pensacola, but the place that has the second timing is Randolph. So we've gone through purpose of timing, timing standards, timing sources, time coordination distribution agencies, timing jitter, and network synchronization. So who holds the UTC time for the world?
Paris, France.
Paris, France.
Yeah, but what's it called?
Bib.
BIP them. Yeah, BIP them.
Yeah.
So who does DoD?
Pensacola.
The organization.
USNO.
Yes, good. USNO. Who does the civilian side?
The NIST.
NIST.
Yes, NIST. What are the 4 synchronization things that we just covered?
Master slave.
Master.
2 more.
Is it Pleisocronus?
Yes. 1 more.
And then mutual.
And mutual. All right, good.
Usually.
Good. I have 9:48. You guys want to take a 5-minute break?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Let's take a 5-minute break. Everybody be back at 9:55. All right?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
All right. 9:55. Be there, be square. All right, I got 9:55. 5 is who isn't back? Well, I don't know.
I'm here, sir.
Yeah, Hamilton, good.
Yes, sir.
Hancock,
Yes, sir.
Londono.
Yes, sir.
Sorry. Bridges,
Present, sir.
Hubbard, Hubbard.
Nikki Bellman pull it.
Matei,
Here, sir.
Richard,
Yes, sir.
Tran,
Yes, sir.
Zellers.
Yes, sir.
So Bridges is still in the bathroom, you say there?
No, sir. Hubbard.
Okay, you're back. All right, good. Let's continue on. You're back. And let's go to this one. We're going to look at 1 Bravo. This will be the last one we cover for the day. I should say the morning session. And then we'll cover from 1 Charlie through 1 disregard, from 1 Charlie to 2 Alpha. We're also going to be using the tech manual for the NSM 50 so you guys are familiar with it when you get into your lab tomorrow. 1 Bravo, identify basic relationship of facts, state general principles associated with principles, capabilities, and limitations of multiplexers. As you well know, because I'm going to keep harping on it, you got to score 28 out of 40 in order to pass. Yeah, you're going to touch multiplexers. Big time. Especially when you get into block 9. We're going to look at general multiplexing terms, input data relationships, type of multiplexing, modes of TDM, demultiplexing, signaling formats, and analog to digital conversion. And my wife pointed out to me that I made a mistake when I said that our master clock in our school went out and they came over the internet. No, we came over the intercom and told everybody to change classes. So I apologize for that if you got confused. We didn't have the internet back in 1978. It was a figment of our imagination. So we have general multiplexing terms. We've got analog, digital. The easiest way to remember those two is if you could just pick one of them and apply 3 words to it, you'll know what the opposite is for the other one. So I like to start with analog. You'll notice it says infinite number of values, and if you look at digital, it says a limited number of values. Well, look at analog. Infinite, unlimited, and the last word, something called indiscrete. Indiscrete meaning all over the place. So that's what analog does. If you look at digital, it's the opposite of analog. So it'll be finite, limited, discrete. Discrete meaning you can determine what it is. We look at bit. You guys have probably touched upon it in block 6. Binary digited. Digited. Wow. Multiplexing. combination of two or more users or channels into a single composite signal or aggregate. We also like to relate it to a mission bit stream, or mission traffic is another one we like to talk about it as far as our signal coming out of the multiplexer. Remember, that's multiplexing. So we're taking the users, putting it in a single aggregate, and sending it out to the distant end. It could be anything: audio, video, both audio and video. Things like what I call VIDs, visual intrusion devices for WSAs, which can, they got a bunch of cameras, but there's no audio that goes to it. But they look at the alarms, which, there's sensors all over the place, both in the ground and on the fence. And this is basically a diagram of showing you how everything is built, going from channel 1 to channel 3. And you can see we got the first one being diagonal lines, which is channel 1, the solid bar, channel 2, and then horizontal lines, it's number 3. And it keeps repeating itself, and it uses time in order for it to happen. We look at something called sampling, not to be confused with the buffet. Oh boy, I can't wait till those come back. We have the way it's done as far as sampling is concerned is everything is equal when we do the sampling. In other words, the spacing horizontally in how we do it. The idea is we are going to use sampling as a way to figure out, one, analog to digital information and digital back to analog. And you got to have it in sequence. If it isn't in sequence, then why do you have it? Number 1 goes to number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. You can't get those numbers out of sync, because if you do, then you won't know what it is at the distant end. We have something called frame. This is a sample from each channel. The idea is we're going to develop these frames, and they're going to be in sequence to tell us where each one of them goes when it gets to the distant end. So you can see frame 1 and how it's put together, frame 2, frame 3, and frame 4. This is how the aggregate is coming out of the multiplexer. In other words, multiplexing. Same way as modulation. In a sense, that is. You're still doing something with many different frequencies coming in, and you're combining it into one. Because that's the only way you can do it. Next up, we have something called non-information bits. Now, the way the non-information bits are is anything outside of what is needed. So if you send a 8-bit word to the distant end, that is considered the intelligence. You're telling the distant end, hey, in this particular channel, I need you to do this. Well, in order for it to do it, you have to send something along the lines to, 1, tell it where to go. Number 2 is when to start, when to stop. And if there's not enough information in that 8-bit word, you got to fill it up with stuffing. So the bottom part is you got a frame bit, start bit, and stuffing bit, depending on what you need to use. Now, I'm not sure if they've ever talked about something called overhead in Block 6. Did they?
Yes, sir. I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't.
Overhead is the non-information bits. You're going to see some when we get into synchronous and asynchronous and something called ISO. When we get into that, what you're doing is you're creating overhead to tell the distant end what to do. Hey, this goes into channel 1, this goes into channel 2. And it's got to be synced up that way or it won't work. So we have bandwidth, that's another one. Can be a couple different things. In this case, it could be our rate, it could be the range, from this to that. Just depends on what it is referenced to. Next up, we have async. This one is, you'll notice that line. It says data entering the multiplexer irregular intervals. And we're giving you an idea that this is an 8-bit word. We're going to have something called a stop and start bit. You're also going to have framing bits and so forth and so on. There's other devices that we got to put in there in order for it to get to the dis-end because of that irregular intervals. Your computer works that way when you're on the internet. The idea is, for example, you guys have that, was it Boingo there, right? Boingo?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. You'll notice that during the day from about, I want to say about noon to 8, 9 o'clock at night, it is really difficult to get on and have a consistent flow to your information. But if
Yes.
yeah, but if you were to get on really late at night, let's say 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, man, you can go all night long. Hey, I can play a game on this now. Hey, everything's working. That's because most of you are on it during the day, and at night it trickles off, and then from about 12, 1 o'clock to 6, 7 in the morning, you have a bunch of bandwidth to play with. We'll show you how that's going to work. We also have something called synchronous. Now, synchronous is, hey, this is your time to put information in it. The easiest way to give you that idea in where there is, and I equate this to a train, if this thing had, let's just say it's 16 channels, an idea of giving you 16 box cars, and it's pulling up the depot, and it moves one box car at a time. You have X amount of time to put the information in, and then the box car is going to close up and go to the next box car. If you can't put all your information in it, you got to wait till the next time it comes around. And all this is happening within milli, if not microseconds. So everything, if you don't have any information to put in boxcar number 2, and that is your time to put it in there, you don't have it, well, it opens up, closes, and sends off to the distant end. So you missed your time. Get it? Missed your time. So we have something called isochronous. So in this case, we have a train coming up. Boxcar 1, you got information to stick in there. You're going to have a stop and start bit. Boxcar number 2 comes up. You don't have any information into it. It still needs something to go in there to fill that time so it can be synchronous. So we put what's called stuffing bits in it. We stuff it with bits that doesn't make any sense. Well, actually it does. It's all zeros, so to speak. And then the next one, the third one, the fourth one, and so forth and so on. If you got information in it, it opens it up, put the information in. You got to have that overhead, that stop and start bit. Isochronous is known to have a lot of overhead to it. And it's been my experience when using the FCC 100 is we called it a bandwidth hog. So you had to be careful with that particular card. Now, what is being sent with it? Well, that's a great idea to send your vids with it. Your visual intrusion devices. So you have audio and video that's put all the way in there. You're going to have all your cameras as videos, and then you're going to have all the sensors as another one. That's one way that ISO can do it. But also you could have synchronous. So depending on what's going on, I can tell you this much. I haven't seen isochronous come across for a very long time since the FCC 100 was in process or still out there. The FCC 100 is no longer around. Most of the devices I have seen, isochronous is not in there. But we still talk about it because we might have some of that old equipment still out there that still uses it, but I haven't seen it lately. My guess is we're not going to see ISO anymore. We have something called frequency division multiplexing. Difference between that and TDM is one is frequency, the other one is time. The easiest way to say this is a cell phone. Back in the day when we had FDMA, frequency division multiplexing access. With this in mind, if you had a cell phone, and these are back when they first started coming out with the flip phones and things like that, they would give you the phone would search for a frequency, find this frequency at the cell site, and if you were driving along, cell sites were pretty far apart, but the frequency range that you could get on it was pretty far too, normally within a 10 to 20 mile radius. Well, the problem is when you went from one cell site to the other, is if you were on, let's say, this case, user A, from 82 to 83 gigahertz, and you're talking to whomever it is, and you get to the next cell site where they got to hand off to that cell site, and all of the frequencies are being used. Guess what just happened? You get dropped. Well, that's the problem with FDM, is they didn't have enough channels, and they also couldn't get enough frequencies from the NTIA to do more. So what they did is they came up with TDMA, even though this says time division multiplexing. It's a form of it. So what they were able to do now is, even though your phone was on a frequency, you could still select a channel and put it on there, so they would be able to hand you off and figure out what channel you needed to go and flip in between those channels within that frequency. Now with this, you got something called, anybody? Question? I guess not. Malin, it looks like you got keyed there.
Oh, yes, that was my bad. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's all right. The TDM multiplexer, they call this interleaving. It's mixing the forward error correction with the information. We'll get to that later on, probably about Thursday, I think, before we get to the forward error correction. So you can see that each of the frames, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, that's the number of channels. We're going to get to that in just a minute. The modes of TDM that we always talk about is synchronous and asynchronous, and you're going to see that a lot, especially in the NSM. You're going to see it go between those two. Synchronous, this is where we have time slots in all the channels. Hey, this is your channel. This is your time that you got to put that stuff into. If you don't, it's wasted bandwidth. And it just gives you an idea how everything is working. It stays the same in length as far as the bandwidth is concerned. You don't use it, you lose it. See, frame 1, A, B, C, D is all being used. Frame 2, you got A, B, and there's no C. So that is wasted bandwidth at that point. But you do have a D. And then the next frame 3, which is alpha, and then Bravo and Charlie are not in there. Again, it's wasted bandwidth, but when you get to block or frame 4, alpha is the only one being used. Everything else is blank. With async, that's your flex channels. Problem is you're going to have information, a lot of overhead. So it's going to be some problematic areas like you guys have experienced over there in the dorm. This one is only going to give you time slots when you produce the information. If you're not producing the information, it's going to go into this nice little pot. So if you're on late at night and everybody's asleep, guess what you just got? A whole bunch of bandwidth. So you can play like your Halo and that against other people. So here's asynchronous TDM. You can see the first frame has all 4 being filled. The second frame has 3. So it's going to get quicker to frame 3, from 2 to 3. 3 is going to be more quicker to get to frame 4. So you can see the quicker that information is able to get out, because other people aren't using it, you get to use it at that point. With async, here's your problem with it. It's a lot of information. got the framing bit, the start, stop. That's the bad part about async. But when no one else is on, it doesn't matter. You got a plethora of bandwidth to follow through, and everything's very quick, very quick. Whereas when you got a lot of people on, it gets slowed down, waiting for your time to get on. Now, this one is the isochronous. I wish you to put isochronous on there. As you can see in frame 2, frame 1 shows you everything being filled. Frame 2, from the previous slides in the diagrams that we were using, the stuffing bits are added in if it's isochronous. And that's what makes everything synchronous as opposed to asynchronous. So with isochronous, it's using asynchronous at a synchronous rate. This is the example they give. That's the reason why ISO is what we call a bandwidth hog. Anything we multiplex, we have to demultiplex. So the dis and in has to do exactly what we're doing. So if we encrypt it and send it to the dis and in also needs to decrypt. Wait a minute, let's try that again. If we encrypt it and send it to the dis and in also has to decrypt it, and vice versa. So if you don't, whatever you do in multiplex, you have to do in demultiplex. Easiest way to get that. Now, when we get into signaling formats, this is where I see some problematic confusion amongst the students. We'll try to keep it simple for you. We have 3 different types. There's NRZ, RZ, and CDI. Does anybody have to go to the bathroom right now? Now's your chance.
No, sir.
Okay. Anybody?
No, sir.
All right. This one's going to take some time to explain. So you have NRZ, RZ, and CDI. You're going to see those too. You notice that I've got this particular slide up there. I like it better that way. Save. You'll notice it says read this number. Do you read it from left to right, right to left? Let's start with Zellers. What would you do? Left to right, right to left? You can put it in chat. Zellers. How about Tran? Left to right, right to left?
Left to right.
How about you, Richard?
I would agree with Tran.
Uh-huh. Rich, let's
Left
see,
to right.
Matei?
Left to right.
How about you, Malin?
Left to right.
Hubbard?
Left to right.
And Bridges?
So you asked this question makes me feel like it's right to left? But it's left to right?
Yeah, which one is it? Left to right, right to left?
Left to right?
Okay. Lindono? Missing in action. Londono. Londono.
Sorry, sir. I'm here.
Left to right, right to left?
For what?
Read that number. Do you read it from left to right, right to left?
Left to right?
Okay. Hancock?
I read it right to left.
Okay. We got Hamilton
Left to right.
and Chung.
I feel like the answer is going to be right to left.
You feel like it. Hate feelings. Facts. Left to right, right to left. How
Right
do you
to
read
left.
it? Okay.
Well,
And-
I'm all Asian, so we also do read right to left.
Okay. Zellers, are you back? Type something in chat. Let me know if you're live. He says do not disturb on his icon over there.
You might have lost internet for a minute when you guys didn't text him. Sometimes they're from you patchy.
Yeah. The nice thing about dual monitors is I can see what I'm doing on my left side, and I can also view the OBS and everything else on the right side. So if you put something in chat, I can see it. And on the right hand, the extreme right hand side under 29-9, I see that there's 9 people in there, but Zellers has that do not disturb tab thing on his icon. Anyway, appreciate you. Zellers, you're back?
Yeah,
What happened?
bathroom.
You know, okay. Like Chung did on here, he said restroom and then back. So if you gotta go, just let me know, because there's some parts in here that if you go to the restroom, you may not get later on. So please, just if you gotta go, let me know. I don't have a problem with that. I'm pretty easy to get along. It's if I go through the information and you're not here, then you're gonna scratch your head and go, "What did he just say?" Now, Airman Zellers. Read the slide. It says, read this number. You see the number?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do you read it from left to right, right to left?
Left to right.
Okay. So everybody's got their little thing in there, and they're going, okay, this is probably crazy, but if you really look at this, you read numbers from the right to left, not left to right. This is one of those problems that I see from Dolan Hall instructors, and we try to get them on the right page. But when you look at numbers, any numbers, to include electronics nowadays, all of them like to track from right to left. But it's our habit to see numbers from left to right. Because everybody's going, oh, okay, I read it go 1, and there's 3 zeros, that's 1,000, and 3 more zeros. Well, yeah, you can do that, but realistically, where's the number start? At the far right and works its way up. You wouldn't know if it's a million unless the zeros are in there from right to left. We also look at how to do 8-bit words. It's always from right to left. If you were to look at your O-scope, you would see it tracks from right to left. Now, the spectrum analyzer, they got that one to where the human being section would be from left to right. That's how it tracks. But it has everything to do with what the electronics nowadays is. It's kind of crazy, I know. What do you got for me there, Airman Hancock? You're typing.
Oh, I was just saying about how I was like, am I dumb that I can't count my numbers left to right, that I have to read it right to left in order to understand like what the number is?
I don't think you're dumb at all. It's just that it's a habit that we, as a society, I mean, when I looked at this, I went, oh, crap. Yeah, you're right. We have to read it from right to left, because when you look at it, where's the 1 slot? Where's the 10 slot? Where the hundreds is, and so forth and so on. Same thing for 8-bit words. We always start from the right and work our way to the left. You can see we're looking at an 8-bit word where it goes 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64. Also, the way the signaling format should be is from right to left. It's that way in electronics. There are some devices that use the, for example, the spectrum analyzer you guys used should have tracked from left to right if it was in block 1. I haven't really taken a good look at the comm system analyzer as to how that tracks from left to right or right to left. So it's just one of those things that we try to correct, that when you think about it and you're going, why is this going this way? Well, that's the reason why. I try to give you the why and explain it, as opposed to, well, just push the I believe button. I hate that. So that's the reason why we come up with these numbers, because it all fits into what we call signaling format in the way we track things. So when you take a look at a multiplexer, you can see that everything comes in the first, the second, and third, and fourth. The first number is from, oh, look at that, from right, and it goes to the left. So that's what we're trying to do, is get you guys familiar with how things track, so when you get out in the field, you don't get confused. So we look at this thing called NRZ. Hopefully I explained that to you, Airman Hancock. The good, bad, indifferent, what?
No, sir. I originally read my numbers right to left. So
Okay.
I was just, when everyone was saying left to right, I was like, oh man.
It's nice to know that, I think you and I think one other one was, had the correct answer. I think Chung did. But
Yeah, but he's a bandwagoner, sir.
Oh, okay. I see. Well, you threw him under the bus real quick. Yeah. Anyway, that's good. Now we get that out of the way. When we do signaling formats, now it's the hard part of correcting yourself and looking from right to left. So, non-return to zero. Look at that first statement. It is the most common format within a multiplexer. I do not know why they made that way, but just to give you an idea, remember we talked about users and channels. And let's keep it with channels. We do not know what signaling format is coming from our users, hypothetically. They could be CDI, NRZ, a couple different types of NRZ. It could be RZ, different types. So when it comes into the multiplexer has to have a standard. It came up with being able to convert everything to NRZ, non-return to zero. And I think the way that it works is because NRZ has to have a clock cycle with it, and it's got to sync the distant end with what's internal to the multiplexer. Once they've changed all those different signaling formats into an aggregate signal within the multiplexer, and it is synced up, then we're going to send it out to the distant end with normally a clock cycle with it. Now there are some that are self-clocking, so it makes it easier to convert that signaling format to NRZ and then send it out. Most of the multiplexers that I have come in and touched and played with in that, there are many different channels that use different signaling formats. Some are self-clocking, some are not self-clocking. When it goes to the distant end, most of those are either CDI or NRZ. I don't know why. It's just the way the manufacturers came up with a way. It seems like it is the standard that everybody goes to. So we're going to learn about looking at NRZ and how to decipher those signals. This one, the namesake. Most of these, if you just take a look at the namesake, you'll understand if they're self-clocking or not. NRZ, none of this is self-clocking. What does that mean? It means I, along with the signaling format, when I send it to the distant end, I got to send a clock cycle with it. So that way you have two signals going along with it to the distant end, and when it gets to the distant end, it can take those clock cycles and go, see, this is my timing. And then it's going to use something called phase lock loop and sync it up, and then they're going to break up that aggregate and piece it out to the different channels it needs to go to. We have two different types. We got NRZ neutral and polar. Let's take a look at neutral first. This one tells you that a logic 1 is a +5, a logic 0 is 0. You do have a 5-volt difference of potential. The biggest thing that we have problems with this particular one is it has to be short cable runs. Can't be long cable runs. So when we send it to the distant end, and it's not short, we're going to start losing some of that data. In other words, we're going to have a voltage drop, and the dissonant may not be able to see what is a logic level high and what's a logic level low. This is what it looks like. So starting on the right side, going to the left, we have our first clock coming in. We have the data. So in other words, we're making this signaling format. So we have the clock, the data. We've introduced NRZ as our waveform, in this case neutral. So we're going to go from 0 to +5. We have 0 data coming in. Our logic 0 is always going to stay 0. Now halfway through the clock cycle, this is where that NRZ comes into play. It doesn't care. It non-return to 0. Now when we get to our return to 0 format, you'll see how that works. So with 0, we stay at 0. With a 1, we're going to go to the +5. With the +5, we get another piece of data going in 1. Now I'm mentioning here halfway through the clock cycle. If this was what we call return to 0, it would go back down to 0. And you're going to see it in a little bit. You have 2 1s in a row, so it doesn't go back to 0, hence the name, non-return to 0. You have 3 zeros in a row, so it's going to stay at 0 volts. You have a 1 come in, it's going to go to a +5. That halfway through the clock cycle, it stays at +5. You get another 0 coming in for the data. Halfway through the clock cycle, it stays at 0. It doesn't change. Next 1 for the data, clock cycle, put it in, goes to the +5. Halfway through the clock cycle, it stays there. And so forth and so on. This is how the neutral waveform is developed. Halfway through the clock cycle, because we're looking for something to change to make it self-clocking so we don't have to send a clock to the dissonant. But in our case with NRZ, you got to, in this case. We have something called polar. This one is a +5 to the -5. This one, all the 1s are a +5. All the 0s are represented by a -5. So in this case, we have a 10 volt difference of potential, so we can give it longer cable runs. It could be, when you have neutral, it could be like a 400 or 500 foot run versus a 1,000 foot run for NRZ polar. Again, it's not self-clocking, so anything that's non-return to 0 is not self-clocking. The only difference between the neutral and the polar is the 10 volt difference of potential. The same data comes in, the same clock cycle comes in. Nothing changes halfway through the clock cycle. It stays in its state. That's the reason why we have to send the clock cycle with it. We have 4 different types of return to 0. We got neutral, we got polar, we have bipolar, and we got bipolar with 0 suppression. The last 2 can be classified as alternate mark inversion, AMI, Alpha Mike India. You'll see that in the NSMTO that we'll go over later on today. Let's take a look at RZ neutral. Just like the NRZ, we still have +5 as a 1 and 0 through for logic zeros. You can see the bottom sentence says not self-clocking. Let's take a look at the signal. We got the clock cycle coming in. We got the data coming in. Now the signal format is made. We have a 0 for the data. You can see we're going to stay at 0. Return to 0, so it doesn't matter. In this case, we're at 0, so it stays there. We put an input data of 1 coming in, and automatically it's going to go to the +5. Halfway through the clock cycle, it's going to go back down to 0. Hence the namesake, return to 0. We have another data of 1 come in. It again is going to go to the +5 halfway through the clock cycle. It's going to go down to 0. Anytime we see zeros, we're going to stay at 0 until the next data of 1 comes in, and then we're going to see it go back up to +5, and then halfway through the clock cycle, it's going to go back down to 0. And then 0 again, then a 1, same thing happens. So the difference between the neutral on, when you compare it for NRZ versus RZ, is halfway through the clock cycle, something is happening. There's still, both NRZ and RZ are not self-clocking. In other words, I got to send a clock cycle with the signaling format to make everything stay in sync. Now, RZ polar, this one's a little bit different. Works the same way as NRZ, but you're going to see something really resemble the clock cycles. A logic 1. Oh, I missed you there, Aaron Bridges. I'm sorry. Logic 1s are +5. Logic 0s are -5. This one returns to 0 every time something happens, and therefore it's classified as self-clocking. So let's take a look at this one. So you have a 0 come in. Well, the first place it's going to go, -5. Halfway through the clock cycle, it goes to 0. Starting to look pretty familiar to a clock cycle. Something's happening halfway through the clock cycle, so that's a good thing. We have an input data of 1. We go to the +5 halfway through the clock cycle. We go to 0. We get another data of 1 in there. We're going to go to the +5 halfway through the clock cycle. We're going to go down to 0. Something's happening every time we have a piece of data halfway through the clock cycle. So you can see we have 3 zeros in a row. Every one of those zeros is going to drop to a -5 halfway through the clock cycle. It's going to go back to 0. Hence the namesake, return to 0. Nice thing is, everything that we can see halfway through the clock cycle, something's going to happen. That's the reason why it is self-clocking. Let's look at RZ bipolar. This one's a little bit more confusing, but hopefully after the explanation you'll begin to understand. It is not self-clocking. It's also classified as alternate mark inversion. Let's take a look at it. 1s are either a +5 or -5. 0s are 0. Not self-clocking. However, they do add that little piece in there where it says made self-clocking with 0 suppression. We'll get into that in just a minute. So as you can see, again, we start with the 0 data. It stays at 0 because that's where they see the logic. Now here's where it gets to be where they call that alternate mark inversion. The first data of 1, we always like to go to the positive side first. So we go to +5 halfway through the clock cycle, we come down. The next data of 1, that's where the inversion happens, or bipolar happens. It's going to flip and go to a -5. So you can see the flip-flops between there, hence the namesake bipolar or inversion, alternate mark inversion. You can see 3 zeros in a row. It doesn't change. We get the next piece of data of 1. It's going to go to the positive side. So if you take a look at it, it's going to keep flip-flopping until our next piece of data of a 1. Say up and then down, and then up to +5 and then down to -5 for each one of those logic of 1s come in. Again, this waveform is not self-clocking. This one tells you that if there's a X amount of zeros, And this is where you guys might come across it. In fact, you will come across it when we see the NSM Tech Manual. This one is classified either Bravo 80 or Zulu Sierra. In other words, B8ZS. You might actually see that in NSMTO or Tech Manual. You'll also see Hotel Delta Bravo 3. In other words, HDB3. That also represents zero suppression. Let's take a look at this. What does it mean? It means when it detects a long string of zeros between logic level ones, it may end up throwing a bit violation. Now you have to tell the front end versus the distant end, hey, this is our synchronization. If you see X amount of zeros, bam, you're going to have some issues. So what they like to do is anytime we have X amount of zeros, we're going to do what's called a bit violation. I'm going to explain it here in just a minute. The idea behind it is with that bit violation, we're going to tell the distant end, hey, I've got X amount of zeros. This zero here is that zero that we need to throw that bit violation, let you know to sync back up. Let's take a look at this. So again, we are looking at alternate mark inversion except with the zero suppression. This is a form of self-clocking information. Bipolar with zero suppression is self-clocking. Let's take a look at it. So we have the first waveform comes in, the clock cycle, with the data of 1. Nothing happens. We get the number 1 data. We're going to go to a +5. We get another piece of data of 1. It goes to -5. Halfway through each of those clock cycles, we go back to 0. Then we have what's called, in this case, I think it is the HDB3. You can see that on the 4th 0, with that little terminology that I just gave you, it's going to throw a bit violation. Again, I'm telling the computer, hey, after the 3rd 0, if you see a bit violation being thrown, that is the 4th 0, so you might want to get back into sync again if you're out of sync. So 3 zeros in a row, looks to see if that 4th 0 is in a row. That bit violation, the reason why it's called a bit violation, it emulates whatever the last digit of 1 was. So realistically, if this was another data of 1, it would be in the +5 area. But it's not. It's a 0, so I had to say, crap, I got 4 zeros. On that 4th 0, I need to throw a bit violation. And that's where that comes into play. So I'm going to emulate it, which is going down to a -5, to make things back into synchronization. You can see that we follow it up with halfway through the clock cycle, we go back to 0. Another input data of 0 happens, and then a 1 happens. So it's back on track, emulating what we were supposed to get in the first place. So you can see with datas of 1, everything's going to alternate between each other. But the moment that you have X amount of zeros, and again, this is what you have to tell the signaling format what to do on both the front end and the distant end. You can't have one without the other. In other words, if one is bipolar and the other one is bipolar with zero suppression, on the distant end, you got some problems. So both ends, both would have to be programmed in with bipolar with zero suppression using a couple of those terms that I just gave you. And we're going to see that in the NSM. So bipolar with zero suppression is self-clocking. The next one that we have is something called CDI, condition diphase. If you were to look this up out over the internet, you would see something called Manchester diphase. That is the beginning. I don't know why you can't find condition diphase, because it always refers back to the Manchester one. This one relies on transitions. It doesn't rely on a plus 5 as a 1 and a 0 for a logic level 0. It's more worried about what happens within that time frame of the clock cycle as to whether it's a 0, whether it's a 1. This is self-clocking. So there's 3 self-clocking signaling formats. Take a look at it. Starting from right to left, clock cycle comes in, we got a data of 0. With zeros, there has to be 2 changes or transitions. You can see that we have going into the plus 5, halfway through the clock cycle, goes back down to 0. Those are the 2 transition. One going up, the other one coming down. For a data of 1, it's going to go up and it's going to stay there. That's its one transition. Here comes another data of 1. This one it's going to go down. That's its one transition. You can see that we have 3 zeros in a row, and there's 2 transitions on each one of those clock cycles. We get to another data of 1, there's only 1 transition. So you can see how this is going to be self-clocking by telling the dissonant, hey, I got CDI, so this is what's going to happen. There is a little caveat to it. You'll see that the first one says logic 1s require only 1 transition. It says out of phase with the clock during some clock cycles. What does that mean? It means that anytime we have a data of 1, somewhere in that clock cycle, there is a 50-50 chance that 1 may not start on the leading edge. It may end up in the middle somewhere in that transition. But for zeros, it's always synced with that number. So you'll have 2 transitions. So the dissonant knows what to do with it. Now, what does that got to do with anything? It means that if you got some problems with your lines, by sending CDI down to the dissonant, it can determine whether or not it is a 1 or a 0 with that signaling format. Most signaling formats that I have dealt with when we're sending it to the dissonant is always either CDI or NRZ. I don't know why. When we look at Nyquist's theorem, now we're changing gears. We went from signaling formats to Nyquist's theorem. In other words, we're getting ready to develop an 8-bit word. You guys have already done this before. And you're going, no, we haven't. Yeah, you have. And the way this works with Nyquist's theorem is 2 times the highest audio frequency is going to give us our sample rate. Well, in our case, Dr. Nyquist, because you can look him up, said that the easiest way to do voice is go all the way up to 4,000 hertz. And because of it, we get 8,000 samples per second. Now, most of our radios does between 300 hertz to about 3 kHz. It's a general rule of thumb, but I've seen some as high as, in this case, they say 3,400. I've seen one as high as 3,600. But the way he classified it is anything beyond that 4K, when you start sampling it, has something called fold-over distortion. In other words, you start seeing a problem with everything trying to keep up. In the Block 2 with the PRIC 150, that has PCM in it. When you convert your handset audio, it goes to a digital audio, doesn't it? Sure does.
Yes.
I think it's in the A1, A5, which is the bottom part where everything happens. And then it gets modulated onto an IF signal, and the IF signal goes to the second card and boosts it up to the HF area. It's been a long time since I taught that block. Anyway, this is what Dr. Nyquist had said. And has anybody ever heard of the program Audacity?
Yes, sir.
That sounds familiar.
It is a free audio program for you to use, open source. I use it a lot for my Christmas music and a couple other things because I use what I've learned in here to sync the Christmas lights to music.
Sir,
Yes.
I'm really sorry. So my wife's getting induced right now to give birth. Can I go?
Uh-oh. Are you going to be back? Bridges? Uh-oh. All right, we're going to end it there. I take it Bridges is at his home.
No, sir. He's here.
Okay. I'm a little confused.
His wife is giving birth and he can't be here.
Okay, I got to turn you up. Go ahead and repeat that, please.
Sir, his wife is giving birth. He can't be there, unfortunately, so.
Okay, so he had to leave.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so he's there at the dorms?
No, yes, I'm at the dorm, sir. I have to call her.
Okay, so I got to go, right?
Yeah,
okay,
right now.
Okay, so we'll stop the lesson here and cross our fingers. If you're not back, we know why.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I'll keep you informed.
All right, thank you.
Congratulations, Bridges.
Congratulations.
Thank you, guys.
Hustle, go. You ain't got time. All right, so we're going to stop right there. And what's that?
This is a very big day for all of us.
Oh, really?